pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call. Mrs. Bennett is absent. Mrs. Eckert?
Here.
Mr. Franco?
Here.
Mrs. Goebel?
Here.
Dr. Oshirik?
Here.
Dr. Perbola is in the audience, but here. Mr. Burke?
Here.
Mr. Farr?
Here.
And Mrs. Arnold is not present. 7 present.
Mr. Suppan, do you want to lead us off?
Yeah, so we have our building and grounds meeting. It's basically solar purchasing options. Our last building and grounds meeting, we discussed solar options. I know we've had a lot of different options put out there and different cost analysis, but we're down to option 6A. Option 6A puts us at 100% energy offset, and what that includes is a campus meter that would be net metered, which would be the PC roof and ground, the admin building roof, IC roof, high school roof and ground. There's also a second meter then at Mahoopany, which is a small meter to offset Mahoopany, which puts us at 100%. There's also a third caveat to that plan, which would be we have about 8 acres that we would generate lease revenue through Greenworks. 9-foot arrays, we'd load them up, it'd be $2,500 an acre, so we'd get about $20,000 a year. So the only catch to that would be if we got to work with Penelec, and I don't know with the leasing if they'll allow Greenworks, and Doug may be able to respond to this more, Doug Neidig, if they'll allow Greenworks to utilize our meter or they need a third meter on that site. But again, the main focus of it is the campus and then Mahoopany offsetting 100%. So that's where we're at. This meeting is purely about purchasing. We started off with a power service agreement, which we would buy out in year 6. We started looking at numbers, and now that we're eligible for the tax, the credits, the rebates. Now if we do a direct purchase, whether we fund it directly through a taxable bond or tax exempt bond makes a difference. If it's tax exempt, we get a 15% reduction in our credit. Ryan Hotstein is here from our financial advisor. He'll kind of go into that a little bit more. He'll be the first to present. But we are eligible for the credit. There's 50% credits out there. There's 30% with the Inflation Reduction Act, which we'll get. There's 10% for our geographical location, which we'll get. That was all included in Greenworks cost analysis. There's 2 more 10% credits out there. One is a low-income credit. I don't see us getting that. It doesn't mean we can't apply. I just don't see us getting that. And then there's a domestic product, like a raw organic domestic product credit. From looking into this a little bit more, John Shapolsky and I, the language, how it's written, it's poorly written, where I don't even think the plants and talking to Greenworks exist to meet the language for us to get the credit. If we do, it would be a bonus, but I don't see us getting that either. So again, we're looking at the 30% for the inflation reduction, and then we're looking at the 10% for where we're located. And then again, depending on the market, it would depend on how we fund it if we do a direct purchase. When Ryan comes up here, we have the options we looked at through direct purchase are no money down, $1 million down, $2 million down, $3 million down to lessen our borrowing amount. Also, with a $10.5 million project, we don't have the money for the credit included in there because we didn't need to account for it because we'll get that money back. So the borrowing amount is less. We're not borrowing 10, like for example, for a $10 million project, we're getting 40% back, we're borrowing 6, then whatever we put down. So that when we started running the numbers through our cost analysis with Ryan and I, the most lucrative fiscally option we see is the direct purchase. When our lowest bank balance hits in the year, it's around $4 million. So then we start getting our tax revenue in July. That bumps our bank balance back up. With that low being around $4 million, I'm personally comfortable with maybe a 2. I wouldn't go higher than that. That's my personal opinion, just because our low is around 4. If we're going to put anything down to lessen our borrowing amount. Now, when Ryan comes up here, he'll show you the 4 different options for direct purchase, and we'll kind of go from there. We did retain McNeese Wallace again, just so everybody remembers that if we do go to a direct purchase in a contract, we retain that law firm to go over and make sure it fits our needs. Now, what we plan on doing through a direct purchase, Greenworks is KPN, Greenworks is CoStars. We confirmed with our solicitor that secure procurement and the bidding through that procurement purchasing network, so we're good through a direct purchase. They would utilize their company, they would utilize their engineers, that would all be through Greenworks. We wouldn't mess with that because they live this. What we would utilize is Dewey, our engineering firm, to act as like a construction consultant. They would speak for behalf of the district and oversee and work with Greenworks to make sure things are done correctly. If anybody knows our capital infrastructure, it's Dewey. They'll make sure, what Greenworks is doing and their engineers are meeting the needs of our districts within our building and our existing capital structures. So that's how that will go. Dewey will go on a hourly fee, or like it's not going to be 8%, 3%. They're just going to be billed hourly. With the cost analysis we did through FSL, we built in $75,000 for Dewey, but again, we're being very conservative with those numbers. So the other thing with the direct purchases through FSL, they're 20-year payment plans. So it's less. I like that personally because in year 20, we're probably going to have to replace the inverter of the system. That means our system's paid off when we replace that inverter, which is costly. So that's just something to keep note. With that being said, like Ryan, I was going to bring you up if you want to kind of go over. We have your PDF that you sent us to kind of go over everything and just kind of give us a rundown of the direct purchase options.
Absolutely. Good evening. Thank you very much for having me. As you heard, my name is Ryan Hottenstein with FSL Public Finance. We are engaged as the district's financial advisor and have been for a number of years. Asked to take a look at the different financing options for this project because at the end of the day, this really is just a capital project for the district, and what is the best interest for you in financing that so that you can save the taxpayers the most amount of money. Does everybody have access to this at their desk? If not, I do have handouts if you would like to be able to see them. If you can't read that, I can pass those out quickly or hand a couple.
No, we don't have that. If you have handouts, I would appreciate that.
As he is helping me out and handing those out for everybody, this first page is just kind of an overview of just some of the information we wanted to provide as far as the fact that, hey, these numbers are draft numbers. Market rates constantly change. The ultimate project amount will change. The amount that qualifies for the reimbursement will change. But what we did was we took the information that was provided by Greenworks for the qualifying project and said if we had to finance that on our own, what would it look like given the changes into the Inflation Reduction Act as adopted by the federal government. So that first page is just really a notice saying, hey, these things will change. But to begin with, let's just go over the Inflation Reduction Act and some of those credits. From the credit, you have the option of doing either tax-exempt financing or taxable financing. If you pay from tax-exempt proceeds, you will get the full credit amount, or if you pay out of cash, you will get the full credit amount. So as you heard Chuck say earlier, those credit amounts right now that we're pegging at about 40% of your qualifying project cost will be reimbursed to the district from the United States Treasury. The way the credit is actually worded, and I had tax counsel take a look at this to confirm how this works, is they said if you do a tax-exempt financing, to make the change in the reimbursement, you take the total borrowing amount, and then you subtract out your total qualifying project amount, and then you take the total qualifying project, multiply that by 85%, so that's a 15% reduction in your qualifying reimbursement, and then apply the full 40% credit. That's the way the federal government likes to write language. The algebra of that is simply reduce the 40% by 15%. So in the next page you will see, when you take a look at the reduction of that 40%, you will simply just see the tax-exempt financing base credit amounts reduced by 15%. As Chuck said, you can see under column A in the investment tax credit, you got the 30% base credit, the 10% for the domestic content bonus, another 10 for the energy community bonus, and then the low income bonus, which ranges from 10 to 20%. So for a location that would actually qualify and hit all those targets, technically they could receive a bonus of a credit of up to 70% of that project cost. Now for the district, you immediately hit the base credit. You get the energy community bonus because of where you are in the state of Pennsylvania, so you immediately qualify for that 40%. For the purposes of this financing, the way we were looking at it, right now, given market rates, and assuming that you're going out the full 20 years, looks like makes most sense would be a tax-exempt financing. If you were to shorten that up and say, hey, we want to pay this off quicker, might be taxable, by the time you finally do a borrowing, we would rerun these numbers constantly all the way up until the time you're going to price and say, hey, today taxable might be better or tax exempt. For the purposes of this analysis, right now, tax exempt is better. So in all of these scenarios, you will see that. However, in this case, since we aren't financing the credit that we're going to be getting back, because you'll just get that credit and you'll apply it, you don't have to borrow that amount. So instead of having to borrow the full 10 million, you can borrow the lower amount. That piece will technically be a cash match. So you will get 40% on that piece as opposed to the reduced 34%. So that's one thing that I wanted to point out as well. So that portion will be at a higher reimbursement as you move forward. This page here on page 2 just shows, yes.
Real quick. So there's no issue with timing of that where the credit comes in. You're comfortable that we wouldn't need to finance any of that approximately $4 million then?
Based on the cash flows that you currently have and the fact that the district has $10 million in cash, I believe that from your cash flows, you're probably going to be okay.
Yep.
As we move forward and do the future more cash flow analysis, we can take a look at different options like an extraordinary call redemption language that if you wanted to finance the whole thing and upon receipt of the tax credit from the federal government, you could call those bonds and immediately pay them down. That's language that we could look at. And we could also look at setting up an interim financing piece if you wanted to have just a small piece that was like 12 months so that, but what we don't want to do is borrow 10 for 30, 20 years. But we'll run all that analysis to make sure it's the cheapest. But right now, we don't believe you would need to, because once you file the paperwork through the Treasury's website and portal and the project is complete, you're going to get a reimbursement fairly quickly. You will have to wait until the project is complete, all of that's filed and that paperwork is taken care of. But
yeah, that's kind of my question is like at what point, because we're going to pay Greenworks the $10 million, and so, you know, that won't be all up front. So there'd be some payment schedule, I would assume, that would happen there. So
absolutely,
we would just need to evaluate those cash flows, especially since we're talking about putting $2 million or some amount down.
Correct.
That's going to kind of play out that way. But that does argue to put more down, essentially, because if we use the tax exempt bonds, the more we put down, we get the full 40% versus the 34.
That is correct.
Yeah.
But when we get through it, you also have to look at the time value of money and the present value calculations and all of that. But you're absolutely right. The more money you put down, you're going to get that portion at the higher credit rate versus the amount that you tax exempt finance.
Which in the end may not matter, because, I mean, if this kind of plays out the way most folks think it is, and we're allowed to prepay these bonds, I mean, we could pay these things off in 6 to 8 years probably based on
typical
energy
call
savings.
date on this size would be 5 years.
Yeah.
So that you could prepay within at 5 years.
Yep.
But again, what we would look at is to see that extraordinary call language, which is not typical but can be done. Borough of Lidditz had it in a recent bond offering where they said upon receipt of federal grants, we can call these at par without any penalty at any time, so they didn't even have to wait the 5 years, that they could just be like, pay those off. But again, we'd want to take the analysis, say, okay, what's the premium for that? How much is that costing us in spread? Is it worth it? Do the cash flows look like we don't really need to do it? That sort of thing, because all of that can be worked out as well. And I mean, but obviously at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is make sure we can fund this project at the absolute cheapest cost for you and your taxpayers, so that you can save as much money as possible. You can pay.
So the project has to be done, and then you can call.
You can prepay your bonds at any time at the call date. You won't get the federal reimbursement until the project is finished, signed off on, engineers, all of that stuff. You won't. So there will be a time period between when you finish the project and when the federal government sends in that check. Now, that's the part that you would have to be able to float
Right.
while you're waiting for that.
And just from a timeline perspective, Director Burke and I were talking, like, once motion passes, if it passes, right, it gets the votes, you and I would then begin to talk about our options, tax exempt, non-tax exempt, market values, bond payoff times, like, that's when we begin to dive into all that and look, because then we'd, at that same time, we'd having a contract reviewed by McNeese Wallace, right?
And
So,
yeah, ultimately, it would be, when are you going to start spending?
okay.
When are you going to start spending that $10 million to build this facility? So, yeah, that's when you would want to borrow. You wouldn't want to borrow, I mean, you could borrow now. The rule is that you need to have a reasonable expectation that you're going to spend the bond proceeds 3 years from the closing date. So as long as you met that, you can go ahead and borrow the funds and it would be all right. If you're saying, hey, we're not really going to start incurring a lot of expense until next year, you could wait and say, we're not going to borrow until next year, but understand there's market risk every day, and that goes both ways. It goes up and down. It's really ultimately what is the district comfortable with. So for the purposes of this analysis on page 2, just to kind of show you what it looked like, under those columns A through F, just simply took a look and said, okay, which ones are you eligible for? We took out that energy, the domestic content bonus. Down below there, you will see some of the differences, and if you were to try to qualify for that, what some of those would be. But also, we just simply said, let's reduce those by those amounts. So you would get about 34% all in from the tax exempt financing, and the federal tax credit from tax exempt would be on a $10.2 million project, approximately $3.478 million that could be used for this project to offset those future costs. Moving on to page 3, this is simply just an outline of a number of different sources and uses for the project. Under column A, you have the headings of what are under the sources and then the uses, and then you see columns B, C, D, and E. Columns B are assuming they're all assuming one tax exempt financing. But the first one is you guys don't put any money down other than the portions that you're floating until you get reimbursed. Under column C, you put $1 million down. Under column D, you put $2 million down. And under column E, you put $3 million down. As you can see there, when you take a look at those sources, the more you're putting down, the higher that federal tax credit under the cash contribution gets. And again, that's because you're at that 40% for that higher amount. And if you were to add those up, the most credit you would get from the federal government would be obviously if you were putting the full $3 million down. Under all the scenarios, what we're doing is we are funding the project deposit, which is the initial project cost plus $75,000 as an assumed number for Dewey and the engineering, then cost of issuance and rounding. And you can see at the bottom, in total, when you look at all of those funds, the total project amounts that you would need from the tax-exempt proceeds would be there at the bottom. So what does that look like? Moving on to page 4. Now the next number of pages are all set up identically. It's the only difference being that bottom half that shows the detailed cash flows, which are headed with the columns A, B, C, D, and E, are the details of what is listed above under the amount of debt service and down payment, your total cash flows, your total net cash flows. So all the colors for the next pages tie to that top chart. Just so they're going to be identical from here on out, but to give you a rundown. So under the invested funding model, where the investor or the would be receiving the tax credit and you would not, your total contract payment for the lease period, the future debt service, and again, we assume that to be 15 years, so that in all these scenarios, they were 20 years. So that one's 20 years, they're all 20 years in total. The total grand total for the contract payment, debt service, and down payment was $11,294,000. The total cash outflows was $14,217,000, and the total net cash flows to the district, counting all of the savings, is $23 million. When you take a look at the district tax exempt, that total debt service going out the door was $9.7 million. The total cash flows is $12.76, and the total net cash flows is $25 million. So higher than if you were to finance it through the power purchase agreement. District, $1 million down, it continues to grow slightly in your savings and the amount of cash back. $2 million down, the same. $3 million down, again, it grows as well. The thing I want to kind of point out there is when you take a look at the total net cash flows. So if you're just looking at the total net cash flows between the district tax exempt with no money down, it lists $25,165,000. If you look at the total district cash flow, net cash flows with $3 million down, it's $26.8 million. So you look at that and you say, wow, that's, it's an additional $1,700,000, $1,600,000 that we're saving by putting down that $3 million. One thing I want to point out is you really should be considering the net present value, because since you're putting that money down, you're not going to be earning on it, you don't have it in your portfolio to earn interest. You really should take a look at that. So one of the purposes of the analysis is we discounted all of these cash flows to come up with, given a net present value factor, what is our, at the end of the day, total net present value cash flow. For the purposes of calculation, they were all calculated at 3.5%. The model set up, we can change that to anything you guys would ever to see. If you wanted to say, what does 2% look like? What does 4% look like? We can simply just add that in and provide updates. Taking a look at the net present value cash flows, this project under an invested model would save $10.1 million, $10.079. District financed through a tax exempt with the credit from the federal government, the savings, net present value jump up to 11.79, and then for every $1 million, it goes up slightly. But you can see, when you look at that $3 million down versus no money down, from a present value perspective, there's only a difference there of about $400,000. So when you look at it, when you talk about true gross cash flow, you're like, wow, we saved $1.6 million. You did, but net present value, that $3 million down was really only worth, the present value calculation, additional $400,000. On the following pages, 5, 6, 7, and 8, they are all the exact same analysis with the same type of cash flow setup. So, but the top remains the same. So when you're comparing, we don't necessarily want to walk through every single one because the point is the same on all of those next sheets. But happy to answer any questions, discussions that you may have.
This is for later. I'm just trying to think ahead. Like right now, like what's a 20-year bond for school districts taxable versus non-taxable approximately? If you had to just ballpark that.
We're looking at a premium of probably 150 to 250 basis points across the curve.
So tax exempt 3.5?
No, right now tax exempt for 20 years. What we were looking at, this is probably closer to 4.2. Rates have come up a little bit. I mean, they're still great historically. Yep. But they're not what they were in 21. Sure. And, we get a couple drops in the next 4 months. If we get a nice report, I think the next report's coming out in the beginning of March. If we get a decent report where CPI isn't hot and we look at the Fed actually may lower rates, because right now they're definitely probably pausing them where they had talked about a couple notches throughout this year. We'd be looking at under 4. But there is a significant spread right now between the tax.
So call it like 4.2 or 4-ish to 5.5.
For the 20
6.
years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Knowing what you know about our financial situation, do you have a recommendation out of all this?
On the what?
Out of all the options we spoke of, what would your recommendation be?
To me, I would look at 2 things. I would look at, are there other projects you want to assign that capital to, as opposed to this one, and that you might need? Are there other capital projects around the facility, the capital plant, that you're like, this one that we're doing right now really pays for itself, is kind of cash flowing us positive, but there's this small project over here that's going to cost us $1 million. I'd probably use it for that. I'm a big believer in cash being king, and the more money you have on hand, the better. But to an extent, obviously, you can't build a huge war chest. You're not allowed by PDE. But I do tell people a lot of time, hey, the more money you have, the cheaper your money becomes. So to me, I would look at it and say, what does our cash flows look like? What do we need to do? And pick something that works for you. I honestly think if you wanted to put $1 million down, okay, $2 million, but 3 probably seems to be too high. I just don't know if it's worth that return. I mean, especially you're earning so much money right now from Pliget or from your funds that you have on hand. I'd be arbing that as much as I possibly can.
Thank you. I appreciate
Sure.
your opinion on that.
Thank you. Anything else for Ryan?
All right,
I'm good.
great. If you have any questions, let me know.
Ryan, I appreciate everything. I know you and I have met a ton and you know, and talked about a million numbers, but I appreciate it.
Hey,
This
no
was super
problem. That's
helpful.
what we're here for.
Yeah. Doug Nidek's also here from Greenworks. Doug, if you want to come up, again, they are KPN, they are CoStar's procurement satisfied. They are the largest producer with school districts in the state of Pennsylvania. You know, we have resourced this extensively. McNeese Wallace, who we retained, have vouched for them. So, you know, if we do the direct purchase, procurement satisfied, they would handle the entire thing with their engineers and everything like that. And again, we have $75,000 built into the cost analysis for Dewey to oversee it as our construction consultants or managers. He has option 6A in a slide deck. I know I kind of went over it. I don't know if anybody wants to see it again, if you want me to pull up any slides again.
Let's see the six, yeah, let's see 6A, just a
I
minute.
read
Sure.
the thing and I'm like, I can't.
I've got a couple of hard copies of it here too, if anyone wants to grab one of them.
I'm just gonna walk down so I can see it. I'm sorry. Even with my glasses on.
Might as well take that.
Thank you, Jay Paula.
I'm going to read off of it if I can.
Who's the paper guy?
He's the Thank you.
Right arrow? Go to your presentation.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah.
Would the board like Doug to kind of run through like a synopsis of the slide deck, like each building? Because I think you have each building on the slide deck,
I've
right?
got every array that we've talked about in 6A in this deck. Yep.
Yeah, okay, if you could do that, Doug, maybe a quick synopsis
Absolutely.
through the slide deck, thank you.
Absolutely. So this is the summary of what option 6A looks like. And as Chuck mentioned a little while ago, this is 100% offset analysis. That's why 6A, I think, was eventually selected. And this shows all of the different roof and ground mount arrays at the different locations that all add up to 5.14 megawatts DC of generation, and that represents 100% offset of your electricity use from last year's bills. That's the way we do these analyses. The other project that we've talked about that is a kind of a separate standalone project, if you're interested, is to take another 8 acres at Mahoopany, and we'll lease that ground, those 8 acres from you. We'll do what we call a direct generation project, where we'll connect that directly to the grid and supply electricity directly to the grid. You'll see the lease income. We'll take care of all the rest of that project if that's of interest to you. But basically, so we've got 2 projects. One is the 100% offset project with all of those different arrays shown, adding up to 5.14 megawatts. The 8 acres is a separate bit. So out of all of that, all I did was put together a couple of quick slides just to show you again what we're talking about in terms of the 5.14 megawatt array. That's the 100% offset array. So at the high school, we're talking about 1.6 megawatts on the roof of the building, 0.4 megawatts on the ground. That you can see both of those on that slide on the upper left.
Could I say one thing, Doug? I just want to remind the board, the roofs are at a 10% incline, And so they're pretty much, when you see all that blue on the roofs, I just want to remind everybody, they're pretty much not visible walking around. So like you wouldn't see the roof arrays.
Yep. We've got a similar situation at the primary center. There's a ground array there and a roof array as well. At the intermediate center, it's a completely roof analysis, 678 kilowatts, or 0.678 megawatts. The STEM Academy, 0.22 megawatts on the roof, or 220 kW. And then at Mahoopany, this shows one large array, but really what we're going to be able to do here, if that's what you're interested in doing, is take a piece that's 172 kW, not a very large array at all, maybe an acre or so of ground, tie that directly as its own array to the building to offset that building's electricity use. The rest of that area would be the 8-acre project that I talked to you about a little while ago. So it would look like one large array when you looked at the entire finished product, but they'd be two different arrays, one large and one fairly small, wired separately. And that's really the substance of the project. Our contact information's there again, but you've already got that. I just wanted to make sure that everyone was still clear on what exactly option 6A entailed. And I'm here to answer any questions about that you've got.
Correct, yeah. We pretty much give them the land and we get a check for $20,000 a year based on the 8 acres at $2,500 an acre.
Yep.
And 9-foot arrays, right, Doug? The arrays would be 9 foot, right?
That's a 3-foot high array.
Or 3-foot
3-foot
arrays.
minimum height off the ground.
Yep, 3-foot arrays off the ground.
And we actually do those sorts of leases two different ways. You can either opt for a 2% increase every year on the annual lease payment, the rental payment, or what we're doing in most cases is we're tying those lease payments to in your case, Penelec's commercial electricity rate, so that if it goes up 5 or 10% in a year, your lease rate would go up 5 or 10%. If it slumps for a year or two, which it could, your rate would drop with it. But everyone else who we've worked with on those sorts of projects has tied their lease rate or their lease amount to the utility rate, thinking that over a 40-year period, 30 to 40-year period, the term of this sort of a lease, you're going to go up way more than 2% a year. But you can do it either way.
And we would want the 3-foot, just explain, just because there's 3, 6, and 9, but 3 we can more densely pack, there's less shadow, we can increase generation, therefore
Increase your income.
increase income.
Yep.
It's more for the 3-foot
We're
arrays.
using these sorts of arrays in a lot of agri-solar installations where we're putting these arrays 10 acres at a time on farms and putting them up in a way that, depending on your use on the farm, if you're grazing sheep or chickens, we do a 3-foot array because the sheep and the chickens can hang out under the panels. If you're grazing cattle, we go to a 6-foot or 7-foot minimum height array. Or if you're actively farming crops under the panels, we go to 7 feet so you don't hit your head on it. If you're grazing horses or you're running some types of equipment, we go up to a 9-foot minimum panel height array. And basically what we're doing in these cases is putting solar up on farms so that it's adding about 3 times the income that a farmer can generate per acre from actually farming the ground, while it's keeping animals and the people who are doing the active farming more comfortable. And I've got 2 or 3 situations right now. I've got dozens of farm projects that we're doing, 2 or 3 situations where we're probably saving the family farm in the process with the additional income based on the lease of the array.
So for our project, Doug, are all of the ground arrays 3-foot arrays?
Yes, yes, unless you would choose, Paul, to go higher in the air.
No, I don't have the engineering technical skills to decide that.
And again, I've got two districts now, Midwest and Central Columbia, both of whom have 3-foot high arrays already installed, who've brought sheep in, and they're letting their Future Farmers of America club manage the sheep with the help of a local farmer.
Board week?
John Shapolsky and I talked, are you talking about taking care of like the ground and stuff? Yeah, the maintenance. We talked, I mean, honestly, we can talk to local farmers, FFA, sheep, animals. We also talked, there's robotics out there that will just continue to move throughout the day and chop down the grass. We'd have to make a decision, but there's multiple options we could pursue on what we think is best. I know a couple, a couple of the school districts, I visited 3 or 4, they worked with local farmers and they rotated their sheep in and out and in different sections of the arrays, and they kind of had a mutual relationship with the farmers. It worked awesome. The kids loved it. FFA took care of it. I certainly think that's an option in our geographical location. And we definitely want the 3-foot arrays just because it increases production, right, generation, right? So it's a no-brainer.
We got the idea for bringing this project potentially to our school district by Midwest School District. I had read an article about how Midwest was offsetting, at the time it was like 92% of their energy costs by the installation of solar. And I think since that point they've done 2 additional projects, I believe. But I mean, that's when I went into Dr. Suppan and I said, hey, we have to investigate this. This potentially could be a game changer for us financially. And I think that you ended up out at Midwest. I think that was
at Midwest, Central Columbia. I was another one in Harrisburg. When I was at Midwest, they had 2 phases down. They were looking at a 3rd phase of solar.
Exactly. Exactly. They're actually at 110% offset now.
Yeah.
If the land would transfer,
So if we leased the land at Mahoopany out
Yep.
on a term,
Yep.
what if at some point in the future, I think Dr. Pavola is saying that we sell that facility?
the lease would transfer with the property to whomever you would sell it to. It's pretty straight up. Yep.
Can you remind us again when we would need to start putting out funds?
Say it one more time?
If we decided, say we decided in March we want to go ahead with the project.
Yep.
When will we first need to start paying money out?
There'd be a deposit, and I'll get you an advance or a payment schedule on the project in general, and it'll be in the contract. But there's a deposit up front, and then there's progress payments along the course of it. It's a fairly standard construction-looking schedule as far as payments are
I
concerned.
mean, there's a lot of permitting requirements
Yep.
before you actually start construction.
Exactly. Yeah, so we'd look for some sort of a deposit up front that would cover all the engineering and permitting work that we do, the preparation of the application to the utility. That's not the bulk of the cost of the project, obviously. The bigger costs come in when we start ordering components, the modules, the racking, the posts, the things.
How many months out would that be?
I'm sorry?
How many months out?
That's 8 months out. Probably, the approval process is an 8-month process, and we don't order anything until we've gotten the township, any municipal approvals and the utility approval. We don't order any components for the project until we've gotten those approvals in place.
So
Because every now and then you run into problems.
So large funding amounts wouldn't start until 8 months from
That's-
when we approve it?
That's correct, and we'll get you that exact schedule as soon as you're ready for it.
Okay.
Yep.
It's worth noting, too, we're currently on a 36-month term with Direct Energy at our current kilowatt rate of .079. That will run out next December. So we're actually in a good timeline if we started this, where we might be able to flip the switch right when we end that 36-month term with Direct Energy, because there is penalty on that for starting something like solar while we're still in contract. So like the timeline is kind of linking up if we're going to do this.
Yep. It's good planning on your part.
Next December, not this upcoming December, 25, yeah.
Director Eckert asked, have they run into any permitting issues that are pretty common throughout the other projects?
Yep. Honestly, with schools and with other not-for-profits, we have not run into those sorts of issues. We've run into things like a neighbor saying, well, I'd rather you put that ground array over there instead of here, and we've accommodated that. But I've never run into the big pushback issue, whether it's from the utility or from the township or the community, especially when it comes to schools. When we're doing farms, it can be a different story depending on who the neighbors are. But in these cases, it doesn't mean it's not going to happen, but we've never run into it.
Just so you know, Mr. Doherty and I did meet with the county commissioners. They have seen our plans. They said they have zero issue with it. So
They love it.
yeah, they love
They
it.
really liked it.
I just hope we don't have some random special dog that goes places. That's what I'm- that's
You never know. But our experience in working with townships and municipalities when we're dealing with a school project is that the community understands the educational value of the project. They understand it's good for taxpayers and for the school, but they understand it's great for educational value as well.
Anything else for Doug? Well, I
Thank
want to thank you too, Doug.
Absolutely.
I think 50% of my life, the last 18 months, have been you and Ryan, so I appreciate it.
No problem at all.
Yeah, I
No
appreciate
problem.
it.
Great to see you.
Thank you.
We do have Ethan Fick from Dewey Engineering is here. We asked him to come since there's a possibility they will be our oversight partner for this project. But being that it's a buildings and grounds meeting, I'm sure you could ask him any other questions about other projects we have going on, because at this point, other than John Shapolsky, I'm going to say Ethan Fick probably knows our facilities better than anybody. So I just want to point out that Ethan is here if the board has any questions for him.
It might be a good time if there's, I don't have my mic on, so it doesn't matter, but if anybody on the board had questions about the different contracts that we're approving for different projects, like the platform and stuff like that, because there's a bunch of them, now would be a good time to ask them since.
Well, could we, before we change the subject, does the board or the Building and Grounds Committee, can they make a recommendation, or can Dr. Suppan offer a recommendation and the board kind of say yes or no? Because we would like, at this point, you know, we've kind of run the course that we can run on this. I think we're ready to make a decision and put it in front of the school board for a vote, and I would hope to do that at the March meeting. So if there could be a recommendation that comes out of this committee meeting tonight, I mean, I think that's what we would need just to move forward. So if you would prefer, you know, Dr. Suppan or Director Franco?
It doesn't matter either or. From what the gist I got from everything, it would be between 1 and 2. I'm per favor of 2 million down, just for the fact that it lowers everything, the payments, everything up front, and it makes us comfortable financially wise instead of trying to swing a $3 million bond. I don't know if John or Chuck would have any information on that or how you feel.
I was the same way. That's what I said earlier. I wouldn't be comfortable going over 2. It's definitely interesting when you look at the cost analysis with the cumulative net cash flow, and then you look at the present value with the 3.5%. What do you want to do? Do you want more cash on hand, right? Or do you want to put more money down? I think we're comfortable looking at our numbers in regard to our cash balance at its low point at 4 million with the 1 or 2. I certainly wouldn't go above 2. But if we're going to put anything down, it would be the 1 or the 2.
It's interesting because we're at such kind of an unprecedented time because our money is making so much money right now. We just keep reinvesting it, and I mean, we're making over 5% on our money right now.
We made $167,000 in last year just on interest.
Yes.
That's $500,000.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, we keep getting short-term CDs with the inverted yield, well over 5%, and we just keep dumping it in.
So Dr. Suppan, would that also be, what would your recommendation be to the board?
I'm comfortable with 2 million.
Okay.
Now,
Yeah.
with what was just discussed, would we be better off with 1 and keep reinvesting that, and then once our payments come up?
Ryan, do you want to speak?
I was just going to say, you could always just say not to exceed 2 million and then have that conversation as you go.
Yep.
You go down the road, because if you're getting over 5%, you're going to pay less than that in interest. So you certainly wouldn't want to, if you're getting 5% on your cash on hand, you'd want to keep that money in the bank.
Correct.
Right.
That's-
The only thing about
smart.
that, though,
Thank you.
is you know, when you think about these taxable, non-taxable munis, like I just looked, there's a 2% differential on a 20-year, and so if we shorten that up, it would help that a little bit. But if we stick with a 20-year where we're able to prepay, we're getting essentially 6% return on every $1 million because of the additional tax credits. Because I think we're going to end up exactly what you said, which is we're going to use the tax exempt. I think that's going to probably be best. And so if we're doing that, every million we put down, we get the full 40%. And so we're not really we're not losing the interest on that money. We're actually going to be slightly ahead, you know, because like you said, it's likely interest rates drop in the next year somewhat. So if we're earning 4.5 or 5 now, that'll be 4 to 3.5 or something like that. So I think doing the 2 million, I think I like what whoever said we can word it as not to exceed the 2 million. And then we can decide based on the financial analysis what makes sense. That seems good to me.
That works.
So what's the recommendation is we go with 6A at not to exceed 2 million.
6A, down payment not to exceed 2 million.
The
Works
tax
for me.
exempt one.
Well, that conversation happens later, the tax exempt or not.
It
That'll,
doesn't have to be in there.
right,
Yeah.
that doesn't have to be in that recommendation.
Well, the committee can vote to make it the official recommendation if they wanted to, you know, go all out here. So if you want to make that official, the 3 committee members would say, somebody make a motion for it, somebody second it. and then
I make a motion for 6A with financing not to exceed a $2 million down payment.
I'll second that.
Okay, so then the 3 members vote.
Yes.
Roll call, please.
John Berg.
Yes.
I don't even know who's on this committee. Laura?
Laura.
Oh,
All right, Laura Goble, Andrew
Yes.
Franco. All right. Motion passes.
Good, thank you. Thank you guys for coming. This is really great work.
Any public comments?
anything for Ethan on other projects? Why we have him?
So those projects, real quick, were the first payment on the big HVAC project at the primary center, resurfacing the floor at the IC, the high school bus platform drains being redone, and the door replacements that are up to like $335,000.
I know Ethan was involved with the door project. The other ones, John Shapolsky will add information in the board meeting about those.
My only question is, the layout of the arrays with the new rooftop units, has that been
Oh, with the
figured in?
HVAC versus where our solar
Yes.
panels are gonna go.
That's great, because this is going to take forever.
That's a good question.
So those rooftop units have been planned and under contract, and their locations are fixed at this point. I believe Greenworks probably at some point in time needs to coordinate the solar layout as they move
Yeah.
forward with
Okay.
it.
I mean, we knew that coming in, and that's why we said, like, this delay, I don't want to say a delay, but like, we intentionally slowed a little bit on this because we knew we had to get the rooftop units installed before we put solar panels up.
Correct. That's all I got. Anybody else? Anything from the public?
All right. All right.
Motion to adjourn?
Second?
Thank you guys again. I appreciate it.